At 19, after 7 years in the same house with a man his mother had married and never left, Ezra Holloway walked out before dawn with a backpack, $43 in his jeans, and the rusted padlock key to a bicycle he no longer owned. He walked 4 miles to the interstate exit and stuck out his thumb. He'd come from a town nobody outside 3 counties had heard of, headed west, because west was the only direction he hadn't been told he couldn't go. The morning he left, his mother was already 2 years in the ground. She had married Carl Doyle when Ezra was 12, 4 years after Ezra's father died of an aneurysm in a Walmart parking lot. A death so plain and sudden that for years afterward, Ezra had the irrational feeling that his father had simply been called away on an errand and forgotten to come back. Carl came into the picture the way men like Carl always came into the picture, at a moment when his mother was too tired to evaluate him properly. He was a roofer. He had a steady paycheck and a pickup truck and a way of laughing at his own jokes that made other people laugh just to be polite. Within a year, Ezra's mother had stopped wearing the lipstick she'd worn since college, stopped meeting her sister for coffee on Saturdays, stopped saying things at dinner that weren't an answer to a question Carl had asked. She got sick when Ezra was 17. Lung cancer advanced. By then she was a smaller person than the woman who had raised Ezra alone for 4 years between his father's death and Carl's arrival. She apologized to Ezra 3 times in the hospital, not for anything specific, just for being tired. She died on a Sunday in November, while Ezra sat in the chair beside her bed, reading a paperback Carl had brought from the gift shop, a thriller about a detective in a city Ezra had never been to. After the funeral, Carl told Ezra he could stay through high school, but after that, he was on his own. Ezra had nodded because nodding was what you did with Carl. He graduated in May, took a job at a tire shop in town, and saved what he could in a coffee can taped under the floor of his closet. 2 months before his 19th birthday, Carl came home drunk and started talking about Ezra's mother. He said things Ezra had spent the previous year working very hard not to think about. When Ezra got up to leave the room, Carl grabbed him by the collar and pinned him against the kitchen wall and explained slowly and with great patience what Ezra owed him for being allowed to live in the house all these years. Ezra waited until Carl passed out. He took the coffee can from the closet. He took a backpack of clothes. He took a photograph of his mother from a frame on the dresser, the one from before Carl, when she was 32 and laughing at something somebody had said off camera. He left everything else. He walked the 4 miles to the I-79 ramp in the dark because if he waited until morning, Carl might be awake. The first ride took him to Pittsburgh. The second took him to a truck stop outside Wheeling. The third took him as far as a small town in eastern Ohio called Stockport, where the driver let him out at a gas station and gave him a $5 bill before pulling away, the way men sometimes do when they recognize something in a young person they can't help with otherwise. Ezra used the $5 for a hot dog and walked into the town because the gas station owner had told him there was a library 4 blocks down where he could charge his phone. The library was closed. He sat on the courthouse steps 2 blocks over and watched a small crowd gathering on the front lawn, folding chairs, a microphone on a flatbed trailer, a man in a brown suit reading from a clipboard, a county tax auction. Ezra had never seen one before. He stayed because he had nowhere else to be, and the bathroom inside the courthouse was the cleanest one he'd had access to in 3 days. The lots went fast. A house on Mill Street for $900 to a man in a faded ball cap. A vacant lot near the high school for $300 to a woman who never looked up from her phone. A storage shed and the half-acre it sat on for $65 to a couple who seemed to be buying it as a favor to someone else. The auctioneer's voice rolled through the descriptions like water finding its level. Lot 15, the auctioneer said. The Vance property at the corner of Route 33 and Pine Lake Road. Single-story brick commercial structure, approximately 1,400 square feet. Operated as a 7-Eleven franchise from 81 to 2024 under franchisee Margaret Vance. Franchise was surrendered to corporate after the operator's death 2 years ago. The building and the lot reverted to the estate, then to the county after taxes went unpaid. The property comes with the building, the lot, and contents as is. Standing utilities, public water and sewer hookup. The 7-Eleven branding and signage remain on the structure, but the franchise license has been formally terminated. Any new operation would need to be independent. Starting bid $50. Nobody moved. The auctioneer scanned the crowd, the corner of his mouth pulling into the slight smile of a man who had run enough of these to know how this one was going to go. Folks, $50. You spend more than that on lunch. A man behind Ezra muttered something to his wife. The wife snorted softly. $50 going once, going twice. Ezra raised his hand. The auctioneer paused. He found Ezra with his eyes and held there for a long moment, his expression shifting from professional patience to something closer to curiosity. We have $50 from the young man on the steps. Do I hear 60? Silence. Going once, going twice. Sold. Lot 15 to the young man. See the clerk inside for paperwork. A few heads turned. Nobody said anything. The auctioneer moved on to the next lot. Ezra stood up slowly. His knees felt strange. He walked into the courthouse holding the $5 bill from the truck driver in his left hand and his coffee can of cash in his right. The clerk was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a name tag that said Ruth Ann. She looked at Ezra over her glasses for the same long moment the auctioneer had taken. You bid on the Vance lot. Yes, ma'am. You know what you bought. A building. You know what kind of building. Ezra shook his head. Ruth Ann sighed, not unkindly, and pulled a folder from a stack on the desk behind her. She spread 3 sheets of paper across the counter and pointed to the lines where Ezra needed to sign. He signed all 3. He counted out $50 from the coffee can in singles and fives, the bills creased and soft from a year of being saved. Ruth Ann stamped a receipt, slid a brass key on a ring across the counter, and handed him a paper map of the town with a dot marked in pencil where the building sat. "Half a mile north on Pine Lake," she said. "Brick building. You'll see the old 7-Eleven sign out front, even though the franchise is gone. You can't miss it. Thank you." She studied him for another moment. "Where are you from?" "Pennsylvania." "Family?" Ezra didn't answer. Ruth Ann nodded slowly. "There's a phone in the back office of that building. The line might still be hooked up. If you need anything tonight, you call the courthouse. Number's on the receipt. My shift ends at 5, but the dispatcher will take a message." She didn't say what she meant by anything. Ezra didn't ask. He thanked her again and walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon light. It was a 40-minute walk to the building. Stockport was small, maybe 3,000 people, a main street with a hardware store and a diner and a feed mill, and Pine Lake Road turned off the main drag, past a church with a gravel lot. The road curved north through low hills, the trees on either side just starting to turn yellow. Ezra walked with his backpack on one shoulder and the brass key in his fist. The building sat at the corner where Pine Lake met Route 33, on a flat patch of land with a gravel apron in front and an overgrown lot behind. It was small, single-story, brick, with 2 front windows boarded with plywood and a faded blue door. Above the door, the familiar red, green, and orange stripes of the 7-Eleven sign were still mounted. faded by 16 years of Ohio weather, but unmistakable. Below the sign, the lit panel that had once been illuminated was dark, the bulbs long since burned out. A second hand-painted addition to the storefront, smaller, beneath the corporate sign, read E.S. 1981. Vance's, in white letters with the bottoms of the V's curled like ribbon. Whoever had painted that addition had been making a quiet point about who actually owned the place. Ezra stood on the apron for a long moment looking at it. He had never owned anything bigger than a backpack. He fit the key in the lock. It turned with the kind of stiffness that came from disuse rather than damage. The door swung inward with a groan. The smell hit him first. Dust, old coffee, and underneath that, the faint sweetness of fruit that had been sitting in a closed building for 2 years. The kind of smell that made you breathe through your mouth without thinking about it. The interior was a single open room with shelves running along 3 walls. The fourth wall, behind the counter, held a pegboard that had once carried cigarettes and lottery tickets. The shelves were mostly empty. A few cans of soup, a box of crackers with the cellophane brittle and yellow, a row of glass bottles of root beer that had crystallized at the bottom, a spinning rack of postcards that had no business being in a franchise location, faded to the soft pink of old photographs. The counter was a long wooden one with a 7-Eleven branded register at one end and a glass jar at the other. The jar held a hand-lettered card. Take a pencil if you need one. There were no pencils in the jar. Someone had emptied it before the store closed. The postcards and the pencil jar didn't belong in any 7-Eleven Ezra had ever been in. Margaret Vance had clearly run her franchise her own way. A door behind the counter led to a back room. Ezra walked the perimeter of the main room first, his fingers trailing along the shelves, his boots leaving tracks in the thin layer of dust on the linoleum. He stopped at the front window and looked out at Route 33 through a gap in the plywood. A pickup truck passed. The driver didn't glance at the building. He went into the back. The back room was small, a desk against the far wall, a 2-burner hot plate on a shelf, a small bathroom with a sink and a toilet, a door that led to what had once been a stockroom and now held 3 empty wooden crates and a folded canvas cot leaning against the wall. The cot was the first thing he saw, and his shoulders dropped 2 inches before he was conscious of it. He set down his backpack. The desk had a leather chair pushed back from it at an angle, as if whoever had last sat there had stood up suddenly and walked away without pushing the chair back in. On the desk, a glass paperweight shaped like a tulip, a coffee mug with the inside ring dark, a stack of bills held down by a smooth river stone, and a calendar from 2 years ago, the page still showing September. Ezra sat down in the chair. The springs creaked under him. He was 19 years old. He was alone in a state he had never been to. He had $38 left in a coffee can, and a building he had bought because the bathroom was clean. He didn't cry. He had used up his crying somewhere on the highway between Pittsburgh and Wheeling, a stretch of dark road where he had pulled his knees up to his chest in the passenger seat of a stranger's pickup truck and let his face do whatever it needed to do while the driver pretended not to notice. That was finished. What he felt now was something else. The strange, weightless feeling of a person who has run out of things to be afraid of. He set up the cot in the stockroom that night. He ate a granola bar from his backpack and drank water from the tap, which ran rust-brown for a long minute and then cleared. He turned off the single overhead light and lay on the cot in the dark and listened to a building he now apparently owned settle around him in the cool October night. Somewhere out on Route 33, a semi geared down on a long grade, and the sound carried clear across the fields. A dog barked once, far away, and stopped. Ezra slept with his backpack as a pillow and his mother's photograph in his fist. Ezra woke before sunrise to the sound of a truck pulling onto the gravel apron out front. He lay on the cot in the dark stockroom for a long minute, his heart doing the slow, heavy thing it had done every morning in Carl's house for the last 7 years. Then he remembered where he was. He sat up. He listened. The truck door opened and closed, footsteps on the gravel, then nothing. He pulled on his boots and walked through the back room into the front of the store, moving slowly because he didn't know what kind of person showed up at a closed building at 6 in the morning. When he opened the front door, there was nobody there. A plain paper grocery bag sat on the wooden bench beside the door. Inside, a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, a quart of milk, a banana, and a folded paper towel. On the paper towel in pencil, somebody had written "Welcome to Stockport." Ezra stood in the doorway with the bag in his hand for a long time, looking out at Route 33 in the pale gray light. A semi went past. The driver didn't look at the building. He carried the bag inside and set it on the counter and made himself a peanut butter sandwich because he didn't know what else to do with the morning. He ate it standing up, looking at the row of fading postcards on the spinning rack. The cards showed places that no longer looked the way they did on the cards. A covered bridge, a state park overlook, a downtown that had been remodeled twice since the photograph was taken. He spent the first day walking the building. It was bigger than it had looked from the apron. The main room held 5 long shelves of merchandise that needed to be inventoried or thrown out, a chest cooler at the back that hummed faintly when he plugged it in, and the long wooden counter with its old register and pencil jar. The back room had the desk and the small bathroom and the stock room with the cot. There was also a narrow staircase Ezra hadn't noticed in the dark. It ran up the side of the back room to a small apartment above, which he discovered when he climbed it carrying his backpack. The apartment was 3 rooms, a small kitchen with a sink and an old gas stove, a bedroom with a metal bed frame and a stripped mattress on a box spring, a bathroom with a stand-up shower and a medicine cabinet that still held a bottle of aspirin and a tube of toothpaste rolled up at the bottom. The bedroom had a window that looked east, out over the trees behind the lot. The kitchen had a small table with 2 chairs. Someone had lived here, recently enough that the place was livable, long enough ago that the dust was thick on every surface. Ezra found a broom in a closet and spent the rest of the morning sweeping the apartment from the back room forward. He carried the worst of the dust outside in a bucket and dumped it in the gravel apron behind the building. He washed the kitchen window with a bottle of vinegar he found under the sink and a section of newspaper from a stack beside the door. The newspaper was 8 months old. The window came clean. In the bedroom closet, he found 3 folded blankets and a set of sheets, all of them clean and stored in plastic bags, the way you store linens you don't expect to use again. He made the bed. By noon, he had a place to sleep that was not a cot in a stockroom. He moved his backpack upstairs and felt, for the first time since walking out of Carl's house, the strange foreign sensation of having a room. Around 2 in the afternoon, he heard tires on the gravel out front. He went downstairs. A man stood on the apron beside an old white pickup truck, late 60s, lean gray hair under a Carhartt cap, wearing a denim jacket over a flannel shirt. He didn't come up to the door. He stood beside his truck with his hands in his pockets and looked at the building. Ezra stepped out onto the apron. "Morning," he said. The man nodded. "You the new owner?" "I am." "You bought it at the auction yesterday?" "Yes, sir." The man nodded again. He didn't introduce himself. He looked the building up and down, taking it in the way a person takes in an old friend who has been away for a long time. "Maggie Vance ran this place for 43 years, he said. took the franchise when she and Henry first opened in '81. They were the only 7-Eleven in 3 counties for a while. Lost the franchise officially when Maggie died 2 springs ago. House fire down the road. Building stayed closed since. He paused. I just wanted to see who bought it. He turned to get back in his truck. Sir, Ezra said. The man stopped. Did you know her? The man considered the question. He took off his cap and turned it slowly in his hands. Knew her my whole life, he said. She was the closest thing this town had to a saint. Wouldn't have called herself that. Would have argued with you about it. He put his cap back on. You need anything. I live 3 miles down Pine Lake. White house with a brown barn. My name's Earl Whitaker. You can knock on my door any time. He climbed into his truck and drove off. Gravel popped under his tires. Ezra stood on the apron until the truck was gone. He went back inside. That afternoon, a woman in her 40s left a Tupperware container of beef stew on the porch step. She drove away before Ezra could come out. The container had a piece of masking tape on the lid that said heat 10 minutes covered. There was no name. The next morning, a man Ezra had never seen left a stack of split firewood by the side of the building and was already pulling away when Ezra heard him. The morning after that, a teenager pulled up in a battered Civic and dropped off a bag of apples from somebody's backyard tree. Each visit was the same. They didn't come in. They didn't expect anything. They left something useful and went home. By the end of the first week, Ezra had eaten more home cooking than he had in the previous 2 years. On the 7th morning, he started cleaning the front of the building. He pulled the plywood off the windows first. The light that came through the dirty glass changed the whole interior. The dark cave of a closed store became a small, bright room with sunlight reaching the back wall. He washed the windows from the inside with vinegar and newspaper, the way his mother had washed windows when he was a boy. He swept the linoleum. He pulled the expired merchandise off the shelves and stacked it in boxes in the back, planning to take it to the dump when he figured out where the dump was. The chest cooler turned out to be working. The pegboard behind the counter had hooks for lottery tickets and cigarettes that he wasn't going to refill. But the structure of the wall told him how the store had been organized. He left the pegboard alone. He moved the spinning rack of postcards to a sunny spot near the front window. The cards had value to nobody but him, but they belonged where someone might see them. The afternoon of the 7th day, he opened the desk in the back office. He had been avoiding it. The desk felt like the most private piece of the building, the closest thing to walking into someone's bedroom. But he needed a pen, and he had seen pens in the drawer when he'd glanced at it the first night, and the time had come to start being practical. The top drawer held what he expected: pens, paper clips, a small stack of unpaid bills from October 2 years earlier, a few receipts, a roll of stamps. He took 2 pens and closed the drawer. The second drawer held bank statements going back a decade, neatly clipped by year. He didn't touch them. The third drawer was deep. It held a single object, a leather notebook, thick and dark, held closed with a rubber band. Beside it, an envelope. Ezra lifted both out. The envelope was sealed and addressed in a neat, sloping hand. It said, "Only for whoever comes next." His hands went cold. He set the envelope on the desk and slid the rubber band off the notebook. The leather was soft from years of being handled. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was the same as the envelope. The first entry was dated October 4th, 1981. Open the store today. First 7-Eleven in 3 counties. Corporate sent a man out from Cincinnati to cut the ribbon, and he left after 20 minutes. The whole town came by. Henry built the shelves himself, even though corporate sent us their standard fixtures. We'll figure out how to make ours look like theirs later. I cried twice during the day. Once because I couldn't believe we did it. Once because my father was supposed to live to see it and didn't. Mrs. Pelham bought the first pack of gum. I made her keep the nickel. Ezra turned the page. October 12th, 1981. Slow week. Tom Mullen came in to buy bread and was $1.20 short. I told him the bread was $1.20 cheaper today. He'll figure it out eventually. He always does. Corporate would not approve of this. Corporate is in Cincinnati. He kept reading. The journal was the running account of a 40-year life. Margaret Ann Vance had opened the 7-Eleven in the fall of 1981 with her husband Henry, run it together with him for 19 years, until Henry died of a heart attack in the back office on a Saturday morning in 2000, and then run it alone for the next 24 years, until her own death in a house fire in the spring of 2024. The entries were short. They tracked the weather, the price of milk, the births of children to families who lived along Pine Lake Road. Every few pages, the entries shifted. The same neat handwriting, recording something more careful than weather. April 1985. Lent the Pellmans $40 for a doctor visit. Don't expect them to pay it back. Don't want them to. Corporate audit next week. We'll have to be creative with the books. August 1987. Gave the Riley boy a job sweeping the back lot. He's 12 and his father drinks. The work was easy. The $1 an hour wasn't. November 1991. Henry and I quietly paid the property taxes on Joyce Hamilton's house. She wouldn't have asked. She doesn't know. She thinks the county made a mistake in her favor. Page after page. Year after year. The same small, careful handwriting, recording loans, gifts, quiet kindnesses, anonymous interventions in the lives of people Ezra had never heard of in a town he'd never seen until 3 days ago. Maggie Vance had kept the books of a hidden life that nobody, apparently, had known about except Maggie herself. Corporate certainly hadn't known. Corporate, by the looks of things, would have fired her in 1985 if they had. Ezra read for 2 hours without standing up. He was 12 pages in when he found the entry that made him stop. The date was September 14th, 2008. Ezra was 3 years old. Drove to Pittsburgh today to see Dr. Hollis about the new medication. On the way home, stopped at the Somerset rest area on the turnpike. A young woman was sitting at one of the picnic tables holding a little boy. The boy was maybe 3. She looked exhausted in a way I recognized from a long time ago. I bought her a cup of coffee and a sandwich at the vending machines and sat down across from her. She told me she was running from somebody. She wouldn't say who. She said she had $90 and a sister in Ohio who didn't know she was coming. The little boy slept through the whole conversation with his head on her arm. I gave her $200 in cash and wrote our address on a paper napkin. I told her if she ever needed help, she could find us. She cried for a long time without making any noise. She said her name was Diane and the boy's name was Ezra. She had named him after her grandfather. She said the grandfather had been a good man, and she hoped some of him would carry over. Diane took the money. She took the napkin. She said she would never forget, and I knew she meant it the way people do when they're too tired to lie. I drove home and didn't tell Henry. I think about that little boy every day. I hope she made it. Ezra closed the journal. He sat at the desk for a long time. The light through the small back window had moved across the floor and was lying in a soft rectangle near his boots. Somewhere up on Route 33, a truck went past. The buildings settled around him in a way buildings do when nobody is moving in them. He had been 3 years old when Maggie Vance had given his mother $200 at a rest area on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. He didn't remember it. He had no memory before he was 5. But he had heard his mother. Once, when he was 8, tell her sister at the kitchen table about a stranger who had helped her when she was running. His mother had been laughing about something else when she said it. She had said the woman gave her enough money to make it to Ohio and a piece of paper she'd kept in her wallet for years afterward. Ezra had been doing a math worksheet at the other end of the table. He had not been listening, except that he had, the way a child listens to things he doesn't yet understand. His mother had run from a man before Carl. Ezra had never known his real father's name. His mother had given him her own last name, Holloway, and had never told him anything about who the man was who had fathered him. And Ezra had stopped asking by the time he was 10 because his mother's face changed in a way he couldn't stand when he asked. She had run from that man with him in her arms when he was 3 years old. She had stopped at a rest area on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. A stranger had given her $200 and a piece of paper with an address on it. He looked at the leather notebook on the desk in front of him. The address on the napkin had been this address, the address of this 7-Eleven, the address of the apartment upstairs that he out yesterday morning, that he had slept in last night, that he now owned because nobody at the county auction had wanted to bid against a 19-year-old runaway who needed a place to sleep. Ezra got up from the desk. He walked to the window and stood with his hands flat on the dusty sill and looked out at Route 33. He didn't cry. He had used up his crying somewhere between Pittsburgh and Wheeling. What he felt now was something else, a thing he had no word for, but which his mother, if she had been alive, would have recognized immediately. The feeling of a person who has been carried by hands they didn't know were holding them. He went back to the desk. He picked up the sealed envelope addressed for whoever comes next. He held it in his lap for a long time. Then he set it back down, without opening it. He wasn't ready. He put the journal back in the bottom drawer. He closed the drawer. He went upstairs to the small apartment that smelled now of vinegar and clean cotton, and he sat at the kitchen table by the east-facing window and watched the afternoon light move across the floor. 16 years ago, a woman he had never met had stopped at a rest area on a turnpike and given his mother enough money to keep them alive. That woman had spent the rest of her life running a small 7-Eleven in a small Ohio town, quietly carrying the rest of the town the way she had carried his mother for a single afternoon at a picnic table. She had died alone in a house fire 2 springs ago. Her store had passed through the hands of the county. The county had put it up at auction. Nobody had wanted it. Ezra had bid $50 because the bathroom was clean. He sat at the kitchen table until the sun went down. The next morning he went back downstairs and started restocking the shelves. Ezra didn't have the money to restock a store. He had $33 left in the coffee can after paying for the building. He had a backpack of clothes, a photograph, and a building full of expired merchandise. He didn't have a supplier, a license, a business plan, or any real idea what running a small store actually involved. The 7-Eleven franchise license was gone. That had been made clear in the auction paperwork. So whatever he reopened would be his own independent store under a borrowed roof. What he had was Maggie Vance's journal, which he read for an hour every morning at the kitchen table upstairs while the sun came up over the trees, and a slowly growing pile of notes in his own handwriting on the back of grocery receipts. The notes were about how Maggie had done it. Officially, she had bought her stock from 7-Eleven Corporate's distribution channel, the way every franchisee did. But the journal made clear that she had also kept a quiet secondary arrangement with a small wholesaler in Athens, an hour south, a man named Frank DeCourcy, third-generation owner of DeCourcy Provisions. From Frank, she bought the things 7-Eleven Corporate would not have wanted her stocking: bulk staples, bread baked locally, eggs from a farm down the road. The merchandise that wouldn't have scanned right in corporate's inventory system. The merchandise people actually needed when the only real grocery store in the county was already closed at 6 in the evening. She had charged just enough margin to keep the lights on. She had kept a ledger of debts in a separate notebook from her main journal. Ezra found it in the same drawer, a thin red notebook with a hard cover that recorded who owed her what for groceries they couldn't pay for at the time. Most of the ledger's entries had small pencil check marks next to them, which Ezra eventually understood meant paid, eventually, in whatever form was possible. A few had no check mark and a small notation in Maggie's hand. Let it go. He spent the second week of his ownership doing two things: cleaning and walking into town to talk to people. Stockport was small enough that within a few days everybody knew there was a young man living in Maggie Vance's old store. Ezra introduced himself at the hardware store, the diner, the feed mill, and the post office. He told everyone the same thing, that he was the new owner, that he was hoping to reopen the store as an independent corner store, that he was sorry he didn't know what he was doing yet, but he was trying to learn. Most people responded with the kind of careful politeness small towns reserve for outsiders. Ruth Ann at the courthouse responded differently. He stopped in to ask her where the dump was and ended up sitting in a folding chair beside her desk for an hour. She had known Maggie Vance for 30 years. She had been one of the regular Saturday morning customers, buying coffee and the kind of bread that came in a paper sleeve and chatting with Maggie at the counter while Maggie read the paper. She told Ezra that nobody in Stockport had grieved Maggie's death the way the town had thought it would. There hadn't been a funeral because Maggie hadn't left instructions and hadn't had next of kin to organize one. Her ashes had been collected by the funeral home in Athens and held there for the standard period, and then, when nobody came forward, interred in a small cemetery plot the county maintained for unclaimed remains. Ruth Ann's voice had a careful quality when she said this. There were people who would have planned a service for her, Ruth Ann said. There were probably 40 of them, but none of us knew the others knew her. She didn't talk about who she helped. We all thought we were the only ones. Ezra didn't tell Ruth Ann about the journal. He didn't tell her about the rest area entry. He kept those for himself, the way Maggie had kept her own ledgers, because some things take time to know what to do with. He asked Ruth Ann instead about the wholesaler in Athens. She gave him the name, Frank DeCourcy. Ruth Ann said Frank had been at Maggie's burial when nobody else was. Frank had driven up from Athens on a Tuesday morning and stood in the small county plot in his work clothes for 10 minutes and driven back. And Ruth Ann knew about it, only because the cemetery groundskeeper had mentioned the strange truck idling on the side road for the duration. Ezra called Frank DeCourcy from the phone in the back office on a Friday afternoon. The line was hooked up. He didn't know why. The bill must have been on autopay from an account somewhere, or Maggie had prepaid it, or the phone company had simply forgotten to disconnect it. He didn't ask. He picked up the receiver and dialed the number Ruth Ann had given him. Frank answered on the second ring. DeCourcy. Mr. DeCourcy, Ezra said. My name is Ezra Holloway. I bought Maggie Vance's old store at the county auction 2 weeks ago. I'm trying to reopen it. The 7-Eleven franchise is gone. It'll be independent, but I want to run it the way Maggie ran it. I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't have very much money. Ruth Ann at the Stockport courthouse said you used to supply Maggie's side orders. I was hoping we could talk. There was a long silence on the line. How old are you, son? 19. Another silence. You bought Maggie's store? Yes, sir. At an auction? Yes, sir. And you're going to reopen it? That's what I'm hoping to. Frank DeCourcy sighed. It was the kind of sigh a man makes when he is putting down a coffee cup he has just picked up. Be at my warehouse Monday morning at 7, he said. I'll be there. We'll talk. He hung up before Ezra could thank him. Ezra hitchhiked to Athens that Monday morning. Earl Whitaker, the man with the White House and the brown barn 3 miles down Pine Lake, drove him most of the way after Ezra knocked on his door at 5:30 in the morning and asked awkwardly whether Earl was going anywhere near Athens. Earl had not been going anywhere near Athens. Earl drove him the full hour anyway. "You know how to work," Earl said as they pulled into the warehouse parking lot. "I worked in a tire shop for a year. Then you know how to work." Frank DeCourcy was 62 years old, built like a man who had spent his life lifting things, and wore the same kind of denim work shirt his father and grandfather had worn before him. He gave Ezra a tour of the warehouse, asked him 3 questions about why he wanted to reopen the store, and then, without ceremony, told him he would extend Ezra the same standing order he had extended Maggie: bi-weekly delivery, 30 days net, starting amount limited until Ezra had paid through 1 full cycle. "You are not going to be able to pay this back," Frank said, "if you don't sell the inventory. So, sell the inventory." "Yes, sir." Maggie Vance was the most decent human being I have known in 50 years in this business, Frank said. "She is the reason this company is still in operation. We almost went under in 1994. She placed a wholesale order 4 times the size of anything she could possibly sell, which she could not have done through her corporate supply chain. By the way, that order was strictly between her and us, and she sold the inventory somehow, and the order kept us alive. I asked her about it years later. She said she had recruited customers I had never heard of. I never figured out how." Frank looked at Ezra for a long moment. "You look a little bit like her," he said. Ezra didn't know what to say to that. He went back to Stockport that afternoon with a delivery scheduled for Wednesday. Earl Whitaker dropped him at the store and refused gas money and drove off without making a thing of it. The first delivery came on Wednesday morning. Ezra spent 8 hours stocking shelves and learning the difference between products that sold and products that took up space. He set up the chest cooler with milk and eggs and a small selection of basic groceries. He stocked the front shelves with bread and canned soup and the kind of items somebody might need at 6 in the evening when the only grocery store in the county was already closed. He bought a small case of penny candy because Maggie's journal had mentioned, in 3 different entries over the decades, that penny candy was what brought the children of Pine Lake Road into the store, and the children of Pine Lake Road were what brought their parents. He had to figure out what to do about the sign. The 7-Eleven branding was still mounted above the door, the red, green, and orange stripes, the corporate logo, faded but unmistakable. Technically, the franchise license had been terminated, and Ezra had no legal right to operate under that branding. Practically, the sign was bolted into the building, and removing it would cost money he didn't have. And the building was known throughout the county as the old 7-Eleven on Route 33, regardless of what he called it. He compromised. He left the corporate sign where it was, but covered it with a long banner of canvas he stretched across the front of the building, hand-painted in the same white letters Maggie had used for her own EST. 1981, Vance's edition. The banner read, "Vance's under new management." It wasn't elegant. It was what he could afford. It hid the corporate branding without removing it, and it made clear to anyone passing on Route 33 that whatever this building was now, it was not a 7-Eleven. He opened the store the following Tuesday. He didn't tell anyone he was opening. He didn't put a notice in the paper. He simply unlocked the front door at 6 in the morning and turned the open sign in the window. The first customer was Earl Whitaker, who came in at 6:15. Bought a pack of cigarettes he didn't need, and a cup of coffee from the percolator Ezra had set up by the register, and sat at the small wooden bench by the front window for 30 minutes drinking the coffee in silence. The second customer was a woman in her 70s who came in at 7, looked at Ezra for a long moment, said, "You're Maggie's boy, aren't you?" and bought a quart of milk and a loaf of bread before Ezra could correct her. She paid in exact change and left without waiting for a receipt. By 10 in the morning, 7 people had come through the store. By noon, 12. By the end of the first day, Ezra had sold roughly $140 worth of merchandise to people who, almost without exception, had paused for a moment at the counter and told him a story about Maggie before they left. A man named Doug told him about the winter of 1987 when his furnace broke and Maggie had paid for the repair without ever admitting she had done it. He had figured it out 3 weeks later from a slip of paper the repairman had left in the basement. A woman named Cheryl told him about the year her daughter had needed braces and Maggie had made the down payment to the orthodontist anonymously. Cheryl had only learned about it 5 years later, when the orthodontist's office had sent her a thank you card by mistake that had been intended for someone else. A teenager named Wesley told him that Maggie had paid the registration fee for his first year of community college. Wesley was now 21 and a sophomore at Ohio University. He came in for a Mountain Dew. He stayed for 40 minutes. Each person told their story almost reluctantly, the way people tell stories about things they have carried alone for a long time and don't quite know how to share. Ezra listened. He took every story without comment. He thanked them. He poured them coffee. He learned by the end of the first day that he was now the keeper of a memory the town had been holding piecemeal for 40 years, and that the keeper of a memory has obligations. If you've made it this far into Ezra's story, hit subscribe. Because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. By the end of the first week, the store was averaging 20 customers a day. By the end of the second week, it was 30. Ezra slept 4 hours a night. He woke at 5, opened the store at 6, worked the counter through the morning, restocked through the afternoon, balanced the cash drawer in the evening, and read Maggie's journal upstairs at the kitchen table for an hour before bed. He learned the names of the regulars within a few days. He learned which families were stretched thin and which were comfortable. He started his own thin red notebook, modeled on Maggie's, and began recording the kind of small, carefully kept information she had recorded. Who couldn't pay this week? Who needed something they hadn't asked for? Who was watching out for whom? He didn't lend money. He didn't have any. But he started letting groceries go on credit for the families who needed it, the way Maggie had, with a small notation in the red notebook and no due date. He let it be known, without saying so, that the pencil jar by the register was still empty, and that anybody could leave a pencil if they had one and take a pencil if they needed one. By the end of the third week, the jar had 9 pencils in it. Earl Whitaker took to coming in every morning. He sat on the bench by the window with his coffee for 30 minutes and then drove off to whatever it was he did. Ruth Ann from the courthouse drove out on her lunch break twice a week to bring Ezra sandwiches her wife had made and to ask, in the careful way she had, whether he needed anything. Ezra was sweeping the floor on a Thursday afternoon at the start of the 4th week when a black SUV pulled into the gravel apron. The driver was a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, in a polo shirt and pressed khakis that looked wrong on the dusty apron in front of a small store. He got out, took off his sunglasses, and looked at the building the way a person looks at a property they have already decided to buy. He walked in without knocking. "You're the new owner." "Yes, sir." "Dale Pickett." He held out a business card. Ezra took it. "Pickett Holdings, Commercial Development." "I'm interested in this lot." "It's not for sale." Dale Pickett smiled. It was the kind of smile that was practiced enough to be effective on people Ezra had not yet become. "I haven't told you my offer." "Doesn't matter what the offer is." Pickett's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes recalculated. He looked around the small store, taking in the freshly stocked shelves, the spinning rack of postcards by the window, the coffee percolator on a small table near the door, the pencil jar with 9 pencils in it. I had been planning this lot as part of a mixed-use development, he said. Retail on the ground floor, residential above. The lot to the east, the old Mullen farmstead, has been under option to my group for 3 years. With your parcel and that one combined, we would have enough frontage on Route 33 for the project I have in mind. Without your parcel, the project is not viable. It's not for sale, Ezra said again. I'll pay $80,000, Pickett said. Ezra had been polishing the wooden counter with a rag when Pickett had walked in. He had set the rag down. He picked it up again now and resumed polishing, very slowly, in long strokes along the grain of the wood. It's not for sale, he said for the 3rd time. You bought it at auction for $50, Pickett said. I know what I paid. I'm offering you a 1,600 times return on your investment. I know what you're offering. Pickett studied him for a long moment. You're 19 years old. Yes, sir. And you're refusing $80,000. Yes, sir. Pickett took a long breath. He looked around the store one more time. He put his sunglasses back on. I'm going to give you a few days to think about it, he said. I'll be in touch. He walked out. The bell over the door rang behind him. The SUV pulled out of the gravel apron in a small cloud of dust. Ezra stood at the counter with the rag in his hand. He had $33 in his coffee can. He had a building he had bought for $50. A man had just offered him $80,000. He could take the offer, walk away, rent an apartment somewhere, eat real food for a year, and start a life that was not standing alone in a small store in a town nobody he loved had ever heard of. He thought about it for 90 seconds. Then he went back to polishing the counter, because Dale Pickett had not understood, and would not understand without being shown, that the building had stopped being for sale on the afternoon Ezra had read about a young mother named Diane at a rest area on the Pennsylvania Turnpike 16 years ago. That night, after closing, Ezra went back to the desk in the back office and opened the bottom drawer. He took out the sealed envelope addressed for whoever comes next. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it back, unopened, and closed the drawer. He still wasn't ready. The envelope had been written by Maggie Vance for whoever inherited the store. And Ezra knew, the way you know things you don't have words for, that opening it required him to first be the kind of person worthy it. He turned out the lights and went upstairs. He sat at the kitchen table by the east-facing window in the dark, and he wrote, in his own thin notebook, a list of the things he would need to do if Dale Pickett did not understand the word no. The list was short. It started with one name. Ruth Ann was at her desk on a Monday morning when Ezra came in. She looked up from her paperwork, took in the look on his face, and set down her pen. Dale Pickett. Yes, ma'am. How much? $80,000. She didn't say anything for a moment. She took off her reading glasses and folded them carefully in her hands. Dale Pickett has been buying lots along Route 33 for 4 years, she said. Most people sell. He's good at his job. He waits. He comes back. He raises the offer. If that doesn't work, he finds a reason the property has a problem with the title, or the zoning, or the back taxes. She paused. Maggie's property doesn't have any of those problems. I know because I processed her estate paperwork myself. He said the project isn't viable without my lot. He's not wrong about that. The Mullen farmstead is the parcel directly to the east. He has it under option. He wants both. What do I do? Ruth Ann looked at him. You came to me, which means you already know what to do. You just want me to tell you you're right. Am I right? Yes, Ezra nodded once. Ruth Ann, he said, there's someone else I need to find. I was going to ask you about her last week, and I didn't because I wasn't sure what I was looking for. He told her then about the journal entry, about the rest area on the Pennsylvania Turnpike in September of 2008, about a young mother named Diane and a 3-year-old boy and $200 and a paper napkin with an address on it. He told her that his own mother had been a woman named Diane, who had run from a man with him in her arms when he was 3 years old, that he had been raised in southwestern Pennsylvania, that he had no memory of the rest area and no proof that he was the boy in the entry, but that the dates and the names and the directions of travel matched exactly, and his mother had once mentioned, in passing, a stranger who had helped her on the road from Pittsburgh. Ruth Ann listened without interrupting. When he was done, she sat for a long moment with her hands folded on the desk. Maggie didn't have any children, she said. She and Henry tried for years. It didn't happen for them. She didn't talk about it, but there were people who knew. She paused. If you are the boy in that entry, Maggie thought about you for 16 years and didn't have any way to find you. I know. And you ended up in her store by accident. I bought it because the bathroom was clean. Ruth Ann looked at him. Ezra, she said, I am 63 years old. I have lived in this county my entire life. I have processed 2,000 county auctions. I have never in my career seen a parcel sold for less than $60. Maggie's store should have sold for $10,000 or $15,000. It was put on the auction roll at $50 because the county tax clerk who set the opening bids that morning made a clerical error. She entered the property's reserve price as $50 instead of $5,000. By the time anybody noticed, the auction was already advertised, and the county attorney decided it was cheaper to honor the listing than to issue a correction. Ezra didn't say anything. I don't believe in fate, Ruth Ann said. I don't believe in destiny. I have processed too much paperwork in my life to believe in anything but the slow accumulation of small accidents. She paused. But I will say this. The number of small accidents that had to happen for you to walk into that auction at that particular moment and raise your hand at the precise instant nobody else did. I don't have an explanation for that. Maybe there isn't one. Ezra looked at the wall behind her desk. There was a framed map of the county on the wall. He had not noticed it the first time he was in her office. Ruth Ann, he said, I don't know what to do with any of this. You don't have to know yet. What do I do about Pickett? She put her glasses back on. She pulled a sheet of paper from a folder on her desk and slid it across to him. There is a woman in Marietta named Vera Lyle, she said. She is a retired attorney. She moved here from Cincinnati 8 years ago. She owes Maggie Vance a debt she has been waiting for an opportunity to repay. She does not yet know that the opportunity has arrived. I am going to call her this afternoon. You are going to drive down to Marietta on Friday and meet with her. She is going to handle Dale Pickett for you. I don't have any money. You don't need any. The week that followed was the longest week of Ezra's life. He kept the store open. He served his regulars. He read Maggie's journal every morning and every night, working forward through the entries year by year, watching a life accumulate in the small, careful handwriting. He learned more about who Maggie had been than he could possibly know what to do with. She had voted in every election since 1976. She had written letters to the editor of the county paper about flood control on Pine Lake in 1989 and 1990 and 2001. She had quietly tutored 14 children in reading over the course of 40 years, recording each one by name and the book they had finished together. She had lost her husband Henry in the back office of the store on a Saturday morning in October of 2000 and had not been able to write in the journal for almost 6 months afterward. The first entry when she resumed had said only, "I am still here. The store is still here. I will keep going." She had kept going for 24 more years. On Friday morning, Ezra drove down to Marietta in a pickup truck Earl Whitaker had lent him without being asked. Vera Lyle was a tall woman in her late 60s, with silver hair cut short and the kind of straight-backed posture you get from a life spent in courtrooms. She met him at a small office she kept above a bookstore on Front Street. She read Maggie's journal entry without comment. Ezra had marked the page with a slip of paper. Vera read it twice, set the book down, and looked at Ezra for a long moment over the top of her reading glasses. "This is a complicated story," she said. "Yes, ma'am. But it is not the story you need me to handle right now." "No, ma'am." "Tell me about Dale Pickett," Ezra told her. Vera Lyle took notes on a yellow legal pad in a hand so small and neat that Ezra could not read it from across the desk. She asked him 3 questions. She asked them slowly, one at a time, and listened to the answers without expression. When he was done, she set down her pen. "Mr. Pickett is going to come back to your store within the next 2 weeks," she said. "He will increase his offer. When you refuse, he will threaten litigation. The litigation will be a nuisance suit, probably alleging that there is a defect in the title or that the auction was improperly conducted. The suit will have no legal merit. It exists to pressure you into accepting an offer that is below the actual value of the property. The strategy works on most people because most people cannot afford to fight a nuisance suit." She paused. "I can afford to fight a nuisance suit. I am retired. I do not need clients. I am going to take your case. I will not bill you. When Pickett's attorney calls you, you are going to give them my number, and you are going to say nothing else. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me about Maggie." Ezra hesitated. "You said this wasn't the story you needed to handle." "It is the story I need to know." Ezra told her everything. About his mother, about Carl, about the walk to the highway, about the auction, about reading the journal, about the rest area entry, about the impossibility of any of it being accidental. He told her things he had not told Ruth Ann. He told her things he had not told himself. Vera Lyle listened without interrupting. When he was done, she sat for a long time. "Maggie Vance," she said finally, "was the first person who treated me like a human being after I lost my son." Ezra didn't know what to say. "My son died of an overdose in 2013, Vera said. "He was 26. I was at the top of my career. I had been a partner at a firm in Cincinnati for 15 years. I came apart. I quit my practice. I moved to a cabin on the Muskingum River because I could not be in the city anymore. I drove up to Stockport one morning a year later for no reason I could articulate. I stopped at the 7-Eleven on Route 33 to buy a cup of coffee. Maggie poured me the coffee, and she looked at me and she said very quietly, 'Whoever you lost, I'm sorry.'" She paused. I had never told anyone in Stockport about Daniel. I had not told anyone in 2 counties. I was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. She looked at me for less than 3 seconds. She knew. Vera took off her glasses and folded them. I sat at the bench by her front window for 2 hours that morning. Maggie did not ask me a single question. She refilled my coffee 3 times. When I left, I bought a postcard from the rack by the window because I needed a reason to come back. I have 143 of those postcards in a box at home. I bought one every time I drove up. Every time I drove up, she poured me coffee and let me sit by the window. Vera looked, "Going to handle Dale Pickett for you, Ezra. I'm going to do it for free. I am going to do it because Maggie Vance saved my life over the course of 143 cups of coffee in a small town she never left, and I have been waiting 9 years for an opportunity to be useful to her." She picked up her pen. Now, let's get to work. The legal challenge came faster than Vera had predicted. Pickett's attorney called Ezra on a Tuesday afternoon at the store, demanding to know whether Ezra had reconsidered the offer. Ezra gave them Vera Lyle's number and hung up. Within an hour, Pickett's attorney had called Vera. Within a week, a formal petition had been filed in the county court, alleging that the original tax auction had been improperly conducted and that the sale of the property to Ezra was void. The petition was 43 pages long. Vera filed a response that was 11. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks out. Ezra worked the store the entire intervening period. Vera came up twice to review documents with him and to walk him through what would happen in court. She did not ask him to do anything except show up. On the night before the hearing, he finally opened the envelope addressed for whoever comes next. He sat at the kitchen table upstairs by the east-facing window. The moon was out over the trees. He slid his finger under the flap and pulled out 2 folded sheets of yellow legal paper. Dear whoever you are, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the store has found its way to you. I am writing this on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2020. Henry has been gone for 23 years. I am 71 years old. I do not expect to live another decade. I have not yet decided what to do with the store when I die, but I know I want to leave something behind for whoever comes next. I never had children. Henry and I tried for years. After Henry died, I made my peace with it. The store became my child. The town became my family. I have spent 42 years trying to be useful to the people who came through this door, and I have kept careful records of every act of usefulness. Not because I needed to remember, but because I wanted somebody someday to know that this kind of life was possible. A small life in a small town can hold a great deal of meaning if you are willing to be quiet about it. I want you to know 3 things. 1. The 7-Eleven license will not pass with the building. Corporate will pull it the moment I am gone. That is fine. The store does not need to be a 7-Eleven. The walls do not care what the sign says. If you want to keep the corporate signage to save money on a replacement, do it. If you want to take it down and put up your own name, do it. Only the work matters. 2. The journal in the desk drawer is a record of 42 years of small acts. I am leaving it to you because I want somebody to know that the people of this town have been carrying each other quietly for a long time. If you want to keep that going, you will know how. If you don't, leave the journal in the drawer and let the next person find it. 3. In September of 2008, I stopped at a rest area on the Pennsylvania Turnpike on my way home from a doctor's appointment in Pittsburgh. I gave a young woman named Diane $200 and a napkin with our address on it. She had a little boy named Ezra. The boy slept through the whole conversation with his head on her arm. I have thought about both of them every day for 15 years. I do not expect to ever see them again. I'm writing this on the chance that the universe is stranger than I believe it is. If you are Ezra, I am sorry I never got to meet you grown. If you are Ezra's child, or Ezra's grandchild, or any of his line, then your grandmother was a brave woman who loved you very much, and I am glad the world made room for her to keep going. If you are none of these things, and you have simply ended up in possession of this store by some other route, then welcome anyway. The work is the work. The work is what matters. Be kind. Keep the coffee on. Let the pencil jar fill up. October 2023. Ezra folded the letter and held it in his lap. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The hearing on Wednesday morning was over in 20 minutes. Vera presented the chain of title. She presented the original auction records. She presented an affidavit from Ruth Ann at the courthouse confirming that the auction had been conducted according to procedure. She pointed out in plain language that Pickett Holdings had not produced any evidence of a defect in the title or an irregularity in the auction process, because there was none. The judge denied the petition from the bench. Dale Pickett was sitting in the second row. He did not look at Ezra as the judge spoke. When the judge dismissed the case, Pickett stood, gathered his coat, and walked out without speaking to anyone, including his own attorney. Ezra and Vera walked out of the courthouse together. The October sun was warm on the courthouse steps. "That's it," Vera said. "That's it. He won't be back." "How do you know?" "Because he was always going to lose, and now been told publicly that he was always going to lose, and he is not the kind of man who comes back after public losses. He will move on to another lot. There are dozens of them." Ezra nodded. Vera turned to him on the courthouse steps. "Ezra, the other story, the one you told me in Marietta, I have been thinking about it." "Yes, ma'am." "You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you came to that store. You don't owe anyone proof. You don't owe anyone a search for your biological father or for a documented chain of custody between Diane Holloway at a rest area in 2008 and Ezra Holloway at a tax auction in 2024. The story is the story. You will believe it or you won't. The believing is yours to do." She paused. "But I will. When I went home the night after you came to my office, I did something I do not normally do. I drove to the cemetery in Athens where Maggie is buried. I sat in my car in the small unmarked plot for 45 minutes. I told her out loud in the empty parking lot that her boy had come home." She looked at Ezra. "Whether or not he is biologically her boy, he is her boy. I needed her to know." Ezra didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The store stayed open through the winter. Ezra worked 7 days a week. He learned the rhythms of a small business in a small town. He learned which weeks the regulars were short on cash and which weeks they were flush. He learned to anticipate the things people needed before they asked. He let groceries go on credit. He kept the pencil jar full. He kept Maggie's red ledger updated with his own additions in his own handwriting beneath hers. He paid Frank DeCourcy on time, every cycle, and Frank DeCourcy gradually extended his terms. He did not get rich. He did not expect to. In February, a 16-year-old girl named Mara came through the front door of the store on a Wednesday afternoon in a thin denim jacket that wasn't enough for the weather. She had a backpack and $41 in cash and the look of a person who had been walking longer than she wanted to admit. She bought a granola bar and a bottle of water. She paid in singles. She was halfway out the door when Ezra spoke. "Where are you headed?" She turned. "West." "Where west?" "My aunt lives in Indiana. I'm trying to get there." Ezra nodded. He thought about it for a long moment. "There's a cot in the back stockroom," he said. "It's clean. If you need somewhere to sleep tonight, you can use it. There's a bathroom back there. I can heat you something for dinner. I can't pay you. I didn't ask." She didn't answer for a long moment. Then she nodded. She slept in the back stockroom that night on the cot Ezra had slept on his first week in the building. He cooked her a grilled cheese sandwich on the 2-burner hot plate. He didn't ask her any questions. In the morning, she took the granola bar and the bottle of water and $20 Ezra had pressed into her hand at the door, and she walked out to Route 33 to hitch the next ride west. Ezra stood on the gravel apron and watched her walk to the road. He went back inside. He took out his own thin red notebook, the one he had started keeping the week he opened the store, modeled on Maggie's. He wrote a single entry. February 14th. Girl named Mara passed through, 16, slept in the back room. She had the same look I had when I walked into this town. I hope she makes it. He closed the notebook. He put it back in the drawer. He went to the front of the store, turned the open sign in the window, and started the coffee. Outside, on Route 33, a semi went past. The driver didn't look at the store. Ezra Holloway was 19 years old. He was just getting started.